The phone rang at 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I knew my life was over. Michael's name flashed on the screen, a name that once represented love and stability, but now felt like a curse. I fumbled for the phone, my hands trembling as I held it to my ear. "Laura," his voice was strained, panicked. "We need to talk. Something very strange is happening." Just a week earlier, he had walked out, leaving a note and a trail of financial devastation. Now, he was calling me, not with remorse, but with a plea for help, his world crumbling around him. What he didn't know was that while I was picking up the pieces of my shattered life, our 14-year-old daughter, Sophie, had already begun her own quiet, meticulous war. She didn't just want him back. She wanted justice, and she was getting it. His words hit me with the force of a physical blow. 22 years of marriage, and this was how it ended. Him throwing shirts into luggage while I stood in my pajamas, completely blindsided. "Michael, stop." I grabbed his arm, but he shrugged me off like I was a stranger. "Talk to me. What's happening?" He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there terrified me. Nothing. No guilt, no sadness, no regret. Just cold determination. "I'm leaving Laura today." The room spun around me. This couldn't be real. Yesterday we discussed Sophie's doctor appointments over dinner. Yesterday he kissed my forehead and said goodnight. Yesterday I was a wife, not whatever I was becoming in this moment. Is there someone else? The question fell out of my mouth before I could stop it. Michael paused, a dress shirt halfway into the suitcase. For just a second, I thought I saw something flicker across his face. Then it was gone. This isn't about anyone else. Our life in suburban Ohio was a portrait of quiet contentment, the kind you see on greeting cards. I was a third-grade teacher at a local elementary school, and my days were a tapestry of children's laughter. The joyful chaos of finger painting, and the small victories of watching a child finally grasp a new concept. My profession was a calling, not just a job. Every day, I felt a deep sense of purpose, of nurturing young minds and shaping the future. Our home, a charming 2-story house with a white picket fence and a sprawling backyard, felt like a sanctuary. It was filled with the scent of freshly baked cookies and the warmth of a life we had carefully built together. Michael, my husband, was the other half of this perfect picture. As a financial consultant, he exuded a quiet confidence and an intellectual charm that had captivated me from the start. He was a man who spoke of investments with the same passion I reserved for my students' progress reports. I trusted him implicitly. He handled all our finances, a task I was happy to delegate. He'd show me detailed spreadsheets, promising a secure future, and I'd just nod, seeing the love and security in his eyes, not the numbers on the screen. His work was demanding, often requiring late nights, but I always understood. I saw it as his way of providing for us, of building the solid foundation we all stood on. Our greatest treasure, and the center of our universe, was our daughter, Sophie. At 14, she was a quiet, brilliant girl with an old soul and a mind that worked in ways I couldn't always comprehend. Sophie had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder at a young age. Her condition was a constant presence in our lives, a silent third member of our family. It required a team of specialists, regular appointments, and most critically, an experimental treatment that offered her the best chance at a normal, healthy life. This wasn't a choice. It was our mission. To fund this, we had created a dedicated medical fund, a savings account we had meticulously built over a decade. It was the result of sacrifices, careful budgeting, and Michael's expert management. It wasn't just a bank account. It was Sophie's future, a testament to our unwavering hope. I remember one evening, Michael came home from a particularly stressful day. I was baking cupcakes with Sophie, her face dusted with flour, her laughter echoing through the kitchen. Michael wrapped his arms around me from behind, burying his face in my hair. "This," he whispered, is why I do what I do." I truly believed him. I saw the pride in his eyes, not just for his success, but for the beautiful life we had created. I saw a man who loved his family, a man who would do anything to protect us. The small red flags were so easy to dismiss. The way he would flinch when I got too close to his phone, the hushed conversations he'd have in the garage, the sudden lack of interest in our family photos. I told myself it was the pressure of work, the weight of his responsibilities. I was a teacher. I knew how to see the best in people. I told myself that Michael was just tired, not hiding. I was so convinced of the life we had that I never once considered it was a life he was actively trying to escape. I was living in a world of my own making, a world about to be shattered by a truth far more painful than any lie. The illusion of our perfect life shattered with a quiet click of our front door. It wasn't a slam of anger, nor a creak of finality. It was just a soft, almost imperceptible sound that signaled the end of everything. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the countertops, still humming a tune from the cupcakes Sophie and I had baked the day before. Michael didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back. I found the note on the kitchen counter, neatly folded next to his wedding ring. My hands, still slightly damp from the dishcloth, felt a sudden cold as I picked it up. "I'm leaving," it read. "I need to find my own life. I've left you all the details in the attached folder. Don't call me." The words were so devoid of emotion, so clinical, that they didn't feel real. I reread them, searching for a hint of remorse, a tear stain, a smudge of ink from a trembling hand. There was nothing. Just a sterile, typewritten goodbye. My mind refused to process it. I was a teacher. I dealt with conflicts every day, but I had a clear protocol for resolving them. This was outside any curriculum I had ever taught. I walked to the living room, feeling like a ghost in my own house, a visitor peering into a life that was no longer mine. The air was still, heavy with a silence that had never been there before. I picked up the manila folder he had left on his desk. My hands trembled as I opened it, the paper crackling like dry leaves. Inside were neatly organized documents, a terrifying archive of a betrayal I hadn't seen coming. The first document was a transfer receipt. My eyes scanned the numbers, searching for some logical explanation. Our shared checking account, which had held a respectable cushion for emergencies, now showed a balance of $147.12. Our savings account, the one we had been feeding for years, was zeroed out. The numbers blurred. This couldn't be right. I checked again, refreshing the page on his laptop. The numbers didn't change. Then I saw the devastating truth. The medical fund, the account we had so meticulously built for Sophie, the one that held over $200,000 for her experimental treatments and future care, was also at zero. My breath hitched. This was not just a theft of money. It was a theft of hope. He had stolen our daughter's lifeline, her very future. I looked at the transaction history, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the mouse. 3 days earlier, while I was at a parent-teacher conference, Michael had transferred the entire fund to an offshore account. Not just his half, not just our shared money, but every last penny we had saved for Sophie's health. The next document I found was a mortgage application. Michael had used Sophie's social security number and my personal information, our entire family's identity, to secure a massive loan. My signature was forged, a crude but effective imitation. The money wasn't for us. It was for a luxurious condo in Florida, a new home for him and his mistress Chelsea, a real estate agent from his firm. They had been planning to disappear, to start a new life while leaving us with the debt and the terrifying reality of Sophie's future health care hanging over our heads like a guillotine. The betrayal wasn't a sudden act of passion. It was a cold, calculated plan to destroy our lives. The world spun around me. This couldn't be real. Just yesterday, he had kissed me goodbye before work. Just last week, he had sat with Sophie and me, discussing her upcoming doctor's visit, his hand resting reassuringly on her shoulder as he spoke of her prognosis. Now, I saw the truth in those moments. It wasn't love in his eyes. It was a performance, a lie. He was an actor, and I was his most devoted audience. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. The late nights at the office, the hushed phone calls, the way he'd flinch when I got too close to his laptop, they weren't signs of a stressed man. They were the telltale signs of a man leading a double life, a man who was systematically dismantling the one he shared with us. I stumbled out of his office and into the hallway, my bare feet slapping against the hardwood floors. Sophie was in her room, a quiet sanctuary in a house that was now a war zone. I knew I couldn't tell her yet. How do you tell your sick child that her father, the man she idolized, had stolen her only chance at a healthy life? How do you explain that the person who was supposed to be her greatest protector had become her greatest threat? I couldn't. Not yet. I had to face this alone. I sat on the couch, the manila folder on the coffee table staring at me like an accuser. I had never felt so utterly alone. I was a teacher, not a financial expert. I knew how to nurture and protect, but I had no idea how to fight this. My own family couldn't help. They lived on fixed incomes and were far away. Michael's parents, a stern, traditional couple, were no help either. When I called them, trembling, a few days after he left, his mother's voice was cold. Michael made his choice, Laura. Perhaps you were not the woman he needed. She hung up. There was no sympathy, no concern for their granddaughter, only a quiet, damning judgment. I was alone, lost in a storm of betrayal and fear. The man I had loved for 2 decades had just stolen our daughter's lifeline and left us to drown in the wake of his callous deceit. The truth of his departure was not just in the empty bank accounts. It was in the sudden, deafening silence of a home that was no longer whole. It was in the way the air seemed to have thinned, making it hard to breathe. It was in the cold, hard reality that the man I had trusted with my heart, my life, and my daughter's future was a stranger, a thief, a liar. He hadn't just abandoned us. He had strategically and methodically destroyed us, all for the promise of a new life with a younger woman. My grief was not just for the loss of my marriage. It was a profound, gut-wrenching mourning for the loss of my belief in a love I thought was real, and the loss of a future I had so desperately hoped for. The house, once a sanctuary of warmth and family, now felt like a tomb. I was a ghost wandering through its rooms, the silence deafening. Michael's coffee mug was still in the dishwasher, his tie still hanging on the closet door, a tie I had bought him for our anniversary. Every object, every scent, every corner was a painful reminder of the life we had, and the life he had so casually destroyed. I found myself crying at random moments, a wave of grief and panic washing over me with the force of a tsunami. I would pick up his abandoned laundry, still smelling faintly of his cologne, and just stand there, a useless pile of clothes in my hands. I'd see his car keys on the counter, and for a split second, I'd think he was coming home. The sudden, gut-wrenching realization that he wasn't would hit me all over again. I was trapped in a cycle of mourning, a prisoner in my own home. But while I was drowning in my sorrow, Sophie was a rock. My 14-year-old daughter, a girl who spent her days wrestling with a rare disease, moved through the house with a quiet, unnerving calm. She ate her breakfast, did her homework, and went to school with a composure that belied the chaos around her. I thought she was in shock, bottling up her feelings, afraid to show me her pain. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I asked her one morning, catching her wrist gently as she headed for the door. She looked at me with those serious, dark eyes that were so much like her father's, but with a wisdom he never possessed. "I'm fine, Mom," she said, her voice steady. "Are you?" Her question hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't fine. I was falling apart, piece by piece, but I couldn't tell her that. Not when she needed me to be strong. "Just checking on you," I mumbled, and she squeezed my hand reassuringly before walking out the door. The typing continued every night. Sometimes it went on until nearly midnight. After I would talk to my sister on the phone, trying to make sense of the situation, the sound would resume, even more intensely than before. "What's that sound?" my sister would ask. "It's Sophie on her computer," I'd say. "Probably homework or games." But even as I said it, something nagged at me. The rhythm was too consistent, too purposeful for games. It was the sound of a person with a mission, a person working with a fierce, quiet determination. I assumed she was chatting with friends about the situation, maybe processing her feelings online the way kids do now. How could I have known that while I was paralyzed by grief, my daughter was already fighting for our future? One evening, I made Sophie's favorite dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup. I knocked on her door around 6:30. "Come in," she called. I pushed the door open, carrying her dinner tray. Sophie was sitting at her desk, her laptop screen angled away from me. She closed it quickly when I entered. "Brought you some food, honey," I said, placing the tray on her nightstand. "Thanks, Mom." She took the tray without making eye contact. As I placed the tray down, I glanced at her desk. Scattered papers, her school planner, a few textbooks, nothing unusual. But there was something deliberate about how she'd positioned everything, like she'd arranged it specifically for my visit. "What were you working on?" I asked casually. "History report on the Industrial Revolution," she replied. She opened her laptop again, but I caught a glimpse of the screen before she minimized whatever she'd been viewing. It looked like an email program, not a school document. "Need any help?" I asked. "I'm good. Thanks for dinner." I was dismissed, politely but firmly. I kissed the top of her head and left, but the uneasy feeling lingered. I was so wrong. Michael, a man who prided himself on his financial acumen, was incredibly careless with his digital life. He used the same simple password for everything, a password he had told Sophie years ago as a joke, his mother's maiden name and the year of his first big promotion. Sophie, a natural with computers and a quick study, had remembered it. While Michael was outliving his double life, Sophie had been quietly, meticulously, and without any hesitation, gathering the evidence she needed. She had accessed his personal and work accounts. She spent her nights meticulously documenting his crimes, gathering proof of his embezzlement, the fraudulent loans, and the illicit relationship with Chelsea. It started with a hunch, a feeling that her father's sudden departure wasn't just a simple case of a man leaving his family. It was too cold, too calculated. Her first step was his second phone, the one he thought he had hidden so well in his closet. She saw him checking it late one night, a device she had never seen before. She waited until he left it charging in his office one day. She only had maybe 10 minutes, but that was all she needed. She got into his messages, and that's how she found Rebecca. The screen filled with screenshot after screenshot of text conversations between Michael and Chelsea. My husband's words to another woman, talking about me like I was an obstacle to remove. Planning their future together, discussing how to handle the Laura situation without losing too much money in a divorce. I felt like I might throw up, but it got worse. Chelsea worked at Michael's firm. She was an expert at moving money around, at creating fake financial documents, at making things disappear. Sophie had found out everything about her: her address, family, work history, credit score, even her Netflix password. She discovered that Chelsea had been stealing money from her clients for years. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank transfer records showing money moving from client accounts into personal ones, fake invoices for services never provided, investment statements that didn't match actual account balances. Sophie had somehow accessed Chelsea's work computer and documented everything. She uses the same password for everything, Sophie would later tell me. Sterling, 2011. That's her last name and the year she graduated college. I found that information on her LinkedIn profile. People are really predictable with passwords. Then came the final, most chilling discovery. Michael hadn't just stolen our money. He had been using our identities to get loans. The $200,000 from Sophie's medical fund was just the down payment on a $300,000 loan he took out in my name. He and Chelsea were buying a house together in Florida, a home that was supposed to be their new beginning. They had used my credit history and my employment information to secure the mortgage, leaving me with a debt and a ruined credit score. They were going to disappear and leave us holding the bag. I remember the night she finally showed me everything. It was a Friday evening. I was putting away her clean laundry when I saw it, a single sheet of paper on her desk, partially hidden under her science textbook. I shouldn't have looked, but something about the formatting caught my eye. It was a printed email thread between Michael and Chelsea. My hands shook as I pulled the paper out. The messages were dated from 3 weeks ago, before Michael left. They were discussing meeting times, hotel reservations, and something about handling Laura when the time came. I sat down hard on Sophie's bed, staring at the evidence in my hands. My 14-year-old daughter had somehow accessed her father's private emails. Mom. Sophie's voice from the doorway made me jump. She stood there holding her empty dinner plate, looking at me with those calm, assessing eyes. No panic, no embarrassment at being caught, just quiet observation. Sophie, where did this come from? I asked. She set her plate down and closed her bedroom door behind her. Dad's not very good with passwords. How long have you known about Chelsea? I asked, my voice trembling. About 6 weeks. I felt sick. While I had been blissfully unaware, my child had been living with this knowledge, a silent burden she was carrying alone. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sophie sat beside me on the bed. I wanted to be sure, and I wanted to figure out what to do about it. Honey, this isn't your responsibility. Yes, it is. Her voice was firm. He stole my medical fund. He lied to both of us. Someone had to do something. I looked around her room with new eyes. Everything seemed different now. Her organized desk, her careful routine, her unnatural calm. What else do you know? I asked. Sophie got up and pulled a spiral notebook from under her mattress. She handed it to me without hesitation. The pages were filled with handwritten notes, printed screenshots, diagrams I couldn't understand, and lists of numbers. My daughter had been conducting surveillance on her own father. This is incredible and terrifying. I struggled for words. I learned most of it from YouTube tutorials. Computer security is really interesting once you understand the basics. Her voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing a school project. Sophie, this kind of thing, hacking into someone's accounts, it's not legal. She looked at me with an expression far too mature for her age. Neither is stealing $200,000 from your sick daughter's medical fund, Mom. The matter-of-fact way she said it sent chills down my spine. This wasn't my little girl anymore. This was someone I'd never met before, someone calculating and focused and completely unafraid. She wasn't a victim. She was a warrior, a silent guardian dismantling the life of the man who had stolen her hope. I realized then that my daughter hadn't been broken by this. She had been forged, turned into something stronger, sharper, and more dangerous than any man could ever be. The moment I realized the full extent of Sophie's actions was not with a bang, but with a simple, quiet gesture. She walked into the living room one afternoon, where I was sitting in a daze, and calmly handed me a manila folder filled with papers. Mom, she said, her voice steady and resolute, you need to file for divorce. I've compiled all the evidence. Inside, I found a meticulously organized dossier, copies of fraudulent loan documents with my forged signature, screenshots of Michael's incriminating emails and texts with Chelsea, and financial records detailing the illegal transfer of Sophie's medical fund. It was all there, a mountain of irrefutable proof, a digital excavation of our shattered life. I stared at the pages, my hands trembling as I held the proof of my husband's treachery. How did you get all this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sophie sat beside me, her expression a mix of fierce protectiveness and a quiet, almost cold determination. He wasn't careful, she replied simply. He never thought to look over his shoulder. She explained how she had used the password he had so foolishly shared years ago. She detailed how she had found his second, secret phone, the one he thought he had hidden so well in the back of his closet. She described the hours she spent every night, a digital warrior in a quiet suburban home, sifting through his accounts and communications. She wasn't a victim, she was a detective, and her case was ironclad. But her work wasn't just about gathering evidence. It was about using that evidence as a weapon. Sophie had spent weeks preparing her counterattack, laying a digital trap that was now beginning to spring. The first part of her plan was an anonymous tip to a local financial news reporter, a respected journalist known for uncovering corporate malfeasance. She had provided a summary of Michael's fraudulent activities, linking them to his firm and to Chelsea, his accomplice. She had also sent a detailed report to the financial authorities outlining the illicit transfer of funds and the fraudulent loans taken out in my name. She had done all of this using multiple proxy servers and encrypted emails, a ghostly presence in the digital world. The trail was untraceable. The first domino fell a week later. I was in my classroom, teaching a lesson on fractions, when my phone vibrated with a news alert. The headline read, "Prominent Financial Consultant Under Investigation for Corporate Fraud and Client Embezzlement." I felt a jolt of both terror and vindication. The article didn't name Michael directly, but it referenced an internal investigation at his firm and mentioned a key accomplice, a real estate agent. It was the first shot fired in Sophie's war. The next domino fell 2 days later. Michael's parents called me, his mother's voice no longer cold and dismissive, but frantic and demanding. "What is going on, Laura? The firm is calling. They say Michael is under investigation. You need to do something. You need to make this stop." I listened, my heart pounding, but I said nothing. I wasn't the one pulling the strings. I was just the observer, a spectator at a movie my daughter had directed. Michael, once the golden child, was now a liability, a stain on his family's reputation. Then came the final, devastating blow for him. Michael called me, his voice not arrogant, but strained and panicked. "Laura," he pleaded, "you need to tell me what's happening. My bank accounts are frozen. My firm put me on administrative leave. Chelsea was fired yesterday. Her clients are threatening to sue her for fraud." He was desperate, trying to make sense of the world that was crumbling around him. What he didn't know was that he wasn't being targeted by some random, vengeful entity. He was being systematically dismantled by a 14-year-old girl with a keyboard and a fierce sense of justice. Sophie's plan was a masterpiece of strategic warfare. She didn't just expose him, she made it so his own actions would be the ultimate cause of his downfall. She had compiled a case file of his crimes, and with each anonymous tip, with each strategic leak of information, she was ensuring that the law and public opinion would turn against him. He had thought he was a mastermind, but he had been outsmarted by a teenager. Her counterattack was not driven by anger or a desire for simple revenge. It was driven by an unshakable sense of justice. He had stolen her medical fund, her lifeline, and in doing so, he had become her enemy. She was a quiet, determined force of nature. She knew that Michael's greatest weakness wasn't a flaw in his financial schemes, but in his utter carelessness and arrogance. He thought he was untouchable. He was wrong. And now, as his world collapsed around him, he was beginning to realize just how wrong he was. The legal fallout was swift and decisive. The evidence Sophie had collected not only brought Michael to his knees, but also served as a powerful tool in our legal battle. The courts, presented with the mountain of documentation, ruled in our favor. We were able to freeze the fraudulent loan and reclaim a significant portion of Sophie's medical fund. I was no longer a victim, I was a victor. The silence in our home was no longer deafening. It was now the peaceful, calming quiet of a family rebuilding its life, stronger and more united than ever. We were no longer defined by Michael's betrayal, but by our own strength and resilience. What Michael had done was unforgivable, but what Sophie had done was nothing short of miraculous. She had protected us when I couldn't, and she had shown me that even in the darkest of moments, a quiet, strategic mind can be the most powerful force for justice in the world. He had left us to drown, but my daughter had built us an ark, and she was guiding us to a new, safer shore. With Michael's departure and the relentless legal machine slowly untangling the financial mess he had created, our lives began a long, deliberate process of rebuilding. The legal documents Sophie had so meticulously compiled were not merely evidence. They were the very tools we used to reclaim our existence. We presented the mountain of documentation, every forged signature, every fraudulent transfer, every incriminating email, to the courts. The legal system, slow and methodical as it was, responded decisively in our favor. A judge, seeing the clear and undeniable evidence of Michael's deceit, swiftly ruled to freeze the fraudulent loan he had taken out in my name. We were then able to reclaim a significant portion of Sophie's medical fund, money that had been siphoned off for Michael's new, lavish life. The money was back where it belonged, but the emotional scars of betrayal ran deep. Yet, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a sense of relief, a release of a tension I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The crushing weight of Michael's betrayal began to lift, replaced by a quiet, determined hope. I was no longer a victim. I was a victor. I found a renewed purpose in my teaching, pouring my energy into my students and finding solace in the simple, yet honest joy of their company. The classroom, once just a job, became a sanctuary, a place where I felt in control, where I could be a guardian and a source of stability for others. My colleagues, once just acquaintances, became a fierce and loving support system. They brought me casseroles, offered to watch Sophie while I met with lawyers, and listened with silent compassion as I tried to piece together my shattered reality. One evening, a fellow teacher named Linda, a kind woman who had been through a difficult divorce herself, sat with me for hours, not offering advice but simply sharing her strength. Her quiet presence was a lifeline. It was through these acts of kindness that I began to understand that I wasn't alone, that my small community was rallying around me, ready to help me rise again. I also became a fierce advocate for families of children with rare diseases, using my experience to help others navigate the complex world of medical finances. What had been a private nightmare became a public crusade. I started a small, informal support group for parents, sharing my story not as a tragedy, but as a lesson in vigilance and resilience. It was a way of transforming my pain into purpose, of ensuring that what happened to us would not happen to another family. I taught them how to spot financial red flags, how to secure their digital lives, and how to trust their instincts when something felt wrong. In helping others, I was, in a profound way, helping myself heal. The process of speaking my truth, of owning my story, was a powerful act of resurrection. Michael, once the confident financial consultant, was now a pariah, a ghost haunting the city where he had once been a pillar of the community. The news report Sophie had sent went viral, his name becoming a cautionary tale in financial circles. He had lost his job, his reputation, and his friends. His name was now a red flag in any background check. He tried to contact me, his pleas no longer of a husband asking for forgiveness, but the desperate cries of a man who had lost everything and was now begging for a way back to the comfortable life he had so foolishly abandoned. "Laura, please," he'd say, his voice strained and desperate. "I know I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. Just tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I'll make it all right." But I was no longer the naive woman he had left behind. "You didn't make a mistake, Michael," I told him calmly over the phone. "You made a choice, and now you're living with the consequences of that choice." I would hang up the phone, and the silence that followed wasn't an empty one. It was a silence filled with a quiet strength, a sense of finality. Sophie, meanwhile, was thriving. The girl who had been so quiet and introspective was now a force of nature. She was no longer just a sick girl who needed care. She was a brilliant mind with a mission. The experience had not broken her. It had forged her into something stronger, more resolute. She started a blog, a quiet online space she named Digital Guardians, where she shared her knowledge of cybersecurity and financial literacy with other teenagers. She taught them about recognizing financial red flags, creating strong passwords, and understanding the dangers of identity theft. Her blog became a beacon of hope for other kids who had been betrayed by the people they loved. She was teaching them to protect themselves, to be their own guardians. Our life, once a tragedy defined by Michael's betrayal, was now a story of triumph. We were a team, stronger and more united than ever. We would sit together in the evenings, not in a strained silence, but in a comfortable quiet, planning our future. Sophie would show me the comments on her blog, messages from teenagers all over the country thanking her for giving them the tools to protect themselves. "Mom," she said one evening, her eyes shining with a sense of purpose I had never seen before, "there are so many families out there being victimized by people they trust. I want to help them." Her words were a balm to my soul. She had not let the trauma consume her. She had channeled it into a force for good. The betrayal was the worst thing that had ever happened to us, but it also became the foundation of our new life. I had discovered a resilience I never knew I possessed, and Sophie had discovered a strength that would carry her far beyond the confines of her illness. Michael had tried to break us, to leave us with nothing, but in his attempt to steal our future, he had inadvertently given us something far more valuable: a renewed sense of purpose, an unbreakable bond, and a legacy of empowerment. We were living proof that betrayal doesn't have to break you. It can be the fire that forges you into something unbreakable, something magnificent. The betrayal by Michael was the worst thing that had ever happened to us, but it was also the crucible in which our new life was forged. It was the catalyst that transformed our pain into a powerful, unyielding purpose. Sophie and I were no longer defined by the trauma he inflicted, but by the strength we found in each other and the mission we built from the wreckage. Our story, once a private tragedy, had become a powerful message of empowerment, a testament to the idea that even the deepest wounds can heal and become a source of profound strength. Sophie's blog, Digital Guardians, which started as a quiet online space, had grown into a phenomenon. It wasn't just a blog, it was a movement. She started hosting online workshops, using encrypted video conferences to teach other teenagers about cybersecurity, financial literacy, and how to spot red flags in their own families. She taught them to be vigilant, to trust their instincts, and to know their rights. The feedback was overwhelming. Parents and teenagers from all over the country would write in, sharing their own stories of betrayal and thanking Sophie for giving them the tools and the courage to protect themselves. She had become a quiet hero, a digital guardian angel for a generation of kids who were being victimized by the very people they were supposed to trust. I, in turn, found my own voice. I began to speak at local conferences and community centers, sharing my journey of healing and resilience. I would stand on stage, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a teacher who had learned a profound lesson about the true meaning of family and security. I reminded other women that their strength wasn't just in their love, but in their wisdom and resilience, in their ability to rise from the ashes and rebuild. My story resonated deeply with them because it was a story of hope, of a mother and daughter who had faced the unimaginable and emerged stronger. Michael's name became a cautionary tale, a lesson in what happens when greed and betrayal consume a person. He tried to find a new life, but he could never escape the digital footprint of his crimes. The very financial world he had once manipulated had now turned against him. He lost everything: his job, his money, his reputation, and his freedom. He tried to start over, but every background check, every credit application, every loan request was met with a digital wall of his own making. He was forced to live a life of constant struggle, a ghost of the man he once was. He lost everything, not because of what we did, but because of what he did. His choices, his deceit, were the architects of his own downfall. We, on the other hand, had built something extraordinary. Sophie's health was stable, her medical fund was secure, and her future was brighter than we had ever imagined. We were living proof that betrayal doesn't have to break you. It can be the fire that forges you into something unbreakable, something magnificent. Sophie and I were a testament to the power of a mother's love, a daughter's fierce loyalty, and the unyielding force of justice. We had not only survived, we had thrived. We had taken the pain of our past and turned it into a legacy of empowerment, a beacon of hope for others navigating similar storms. Our story wasn't about a man who stole our future. It was about two women who took it back and used it to secure the futures of countless others. My favorite part was when Sophie calmly told her father that his actions had consequences. What was your favorite moment? Drop a comment below and let me know. Don't miss more incredible stories of courage and resilience. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.